The most difficult thing about my journey towards affirming faith was not mentally understanding or aligning my heart to what God was showing me. It was deciding when to talk about it. I had been wrestling internally and digging into scripture for a long time, and just acknowledging that got me rejection from more Christian friends than I cared to admit. Coming around and saying, hey, I think God has led me to an affirming place with enough conviction to advocate for it, just felt like begging for more rejection. The pressure to retreat from what I felt God was calling me to was enormous. That's obviously a pathetically small burden compared to what every queer person has to deal with. And no surprise, Jesus tells a parable exactly about this. In Matthew 25, Jesus speaks of 3 servants who are entrusted with different amounts of money and expected to handle it well. The first servant is given 5 talents, which is a staggering, paralyzing amount of money, more money than almost anyone would ever imagine having to deal with in a lifetime. Another servant gets 2 talents, and the final servant gets 1, which is still a significant amount of money, but yeah, that's about what I would expect a normal person to be able to manage. The first 2 servants boldly put their money out into the world, and it gets a return, but it might not have. The final servant buries his money. He knows where it is, but it's not out interacting with the world in any meaningful way. Do you know what the master does to that final servant? He says, throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Call me crazy, but I think we should avoid that. Jesus also talks in Matthew 5 about how you should react when you realize you've wronged someone. He says, if you realize you've been in the wrong, even if you're in the middle of offering a sacrifice at the temple, run immediately to make it right. When was the last time you saw someone get up and leave a church service, not because they were offended, but because they realized they were the offender and they needed to make it right? That would be an extremely public move that a lot of people would misinterpret, but that's what Jesus calls us to. The biggest thing that convinced me I needed to immediately and boldly start talking about where God was leading me in affirming faith actually comes from the Old Testament. You've probably heard how Israel had to spend 40 years in the wilderness. They get right up to the edge of where God has called them to go, and then they chicken out. They do research, and they send in spies, and they hem and they haw, until in Numbers 14, God says, all right, that's it. This hesitation is contempt, and every one of you cowardly people can go die in the wilderness. Caleb, you're cool. But everyone else gets 40 years, 1 year for every day you hesitated on the edge of where I told you to go. Call me crazy, but I think we should avoid that. I've heard that story a million times, and I knew it was a generational consequence, but only recently, when I was worrying about when and how do I start talking about how Jesus is leading me towards affirming faith, did I find Numbers 14:34. 1 year of punishment for every day hesitating on the edge of where God is leading you. That moved me. And I'm urging you, if you have any prompting that queer people should be more invited into faith and into marriage than they are, put it out there, for better or for worse. Run to the queer people in your life to make sure you're not grieving them. And do not hesitate on the edge of affirming faith. Now, does that mean that the conversation is over? No, the opposite. And does that mean that I know exactly where to draw up new boundaries for every individual? No. But I know God is calling us beyond the old boundaries. I've been convicted to move, and I hope you'll move with me.